You got dressed this morning, and you didn't think about it once. You reached for clothes the way you reach for air, a reflex older than memory. But for most of the time our species has existed, not one of your ancestors did that. There were no clothes to reach for, just you, your skin, and the morning. And here's the strange part. Of every large animal on Earth, you are one of the only ones that is nearly naked. Gorillas, covered. Wolves, bears, horses, elephants, covered. Across every climate, a full coat. And then there's us. Smooth, a little patchy, standing in all that fur with none of our own. So of all the animals that could have invented clothing, why the naked one? And why only us? Start with a question almost nobody asks. Why did we lose the fur in the first place? The leading answer is heat. As your ancestors left the forest for open grassland, they hunted by running, tracking animals for hours under the sun. Thick fur on a running body is a death sentence. You overheat. You slow. You collapse before the animal does. So across hundreds of thousands of years, we traded the coat for something else. Sweat. You have 2 to 4 million sweat glands, more than almost any animal alive. You are the best long-distance cooling machine on the planet, wonderful in the heat, and useless at 40 below, in a place your body was never built to survive. So we needed a second skin. And the obvious story is that we made one to stay warm. Except that story has a hole in it. And the hole is time. The evidence says humans were wearing clothes somewhere between 100,000 and 170,000 years ago. But we didn't leave Africa in real numbers until around 70,000 years ago. And we didn't go anywhere truly cold until long after that. So clothing shows up tens of thousands of years before there was any cold to hide from. Warmth can't be why it started. And to find out what, we face a stranger question. If skin and hide rot away in centuries, how could anyone know when humans first got dressed? The answer came from the least dignified source imaginable: a parasite. We have to talk about lice. Here's the biology. Humans carry 2 kinds of lice: head lice, which live in your hair, and body lice, which live somewhere very specific, in clothing. The seams, the folds, the fabric. Body lice cannot survive on bare skin. They need cloth. So they could not exist at all until humans wore clothes often enough to give them a home. So geneticists asked a clever question. When did body lice split from head lice and move into the fabric? When they ran the numbers, the answer landed between roughly 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Sit with that. One of the most hated creatures in human history quietly recorded the birth of clothing long before we ever could. The lice knew we got dressed before we did. They were there. They adapted. They moved in. So if it wasn't the cold, what were the first clothes actually for? Part of it is simple. Protection, not from winter, but from sun, thorns, insects, the thousand small ways an open landscape scratches you. A hide wrap is a barrier, but there's a second reason, and it may be the real one. Look at what we were doing even earlier. As far back as 200,000 years ago, before the lice, before the clothes, your ancestors were painting themselves. Ochre, red pigment, smeared on skin, which means the urge to decorate the body to make it say something is older than clothing itself. We were signaling before we were covering, and a hide is just a bigger canvas. Once it's on your shoulders, the questions start. Whose skin is this? Something powerful? Did I kill it myself? That is the first fashion industry. A handful of humans around a fire deciding who gets to wear the leopard. So let's reconstruct a morning. 170,000 years ago? You wake on the savannah. It isn't cold. You reach for a hide, Not to survive the air, but because of who will see you today. It marks you, your rank, your skill, your place. You're getting dressed for the same reason you did this morning, to be seen a certain way. For a long time, the clothing stayed rough. A skin, a cord of twisted sinew, an edge hacked with stone, the prehistoric bin bag. And then around 50,000 years ago, something changes in the ground. Needles, not just sharp points, needles with a tiny eye bored clean through, made to thread sinew and stitch two hides into one shaped garment. The oldest confirmed one comes from Denisova Cave in Siberia, carved from a bird bone, polished fine, about 50,000 years old. Think what that took. Someone imagined a tool that didn't exist, drilled a hole through a sliver of bone without splitting it, and used it to sew. That isn't instinct, that's engineering. And we weren't the only ones. Neanderthals were working hides long before they met us. In that same cave, the Denisovans left polished ornaments beside the needle. Which raises a strange question. Is clothing a human thing? Or just what any clever, social, freezing animal eventually arrives at? Three kinds of human, in different worlds, reached the same answer. Wrap yourself in something, and make it mean something. Maybe it was always coming? Because here's what never changed. If clothes were only practical, every culture would find the warmest option for its climate and simply stop. That is not what happened. We made clothing mean something, instantly, everywhere. Priests dressed differently from warriors. Rulers wore what no one else could. The dead were dressed for a journey. The oldest fabric scraps we found were already dyed in colors, because plain wasn't the point. No other animal does this. A peacock displays them, but it can't choose to. You can. You do it every single day. You use clothing as a language to say, I belong here. I hold this rank. I am mourning. I am dangerous. I am ordinary. And that language began on the savannah, with a piece of ochre and a draped hide, in a person deciding how to be seen by the people around the same fire. 170,000 years later, the thing that connects you to them, directly, without a single break, is that you got dressed this morning. You didn't do it to survive the cold. You did it somewhere underneath to say something about who you are. That's not a small thing. That may be the whole thing. We get cold, we get creative, we get dressed, and then we spend the rest of our lives insisting we have nothing to wear. The naked ape never really solved being naked. It just learned to speak with what it put on. And you're still speaking, right now.